Imagine a city where the very air seems to vibrate with the hum of creation, where the stones underfoot have been trodden by the greatest minds to ever walk the earth. This is Florence in the year 1504, the beating heart of the Italian Renaissance. But beneath the surface of this artistic paradise, a storm is brewing. Two men, both destined for immortality, are about to be locked in a bitter, public, and deeply personal war. One is Leonardo da Vinci, the elder statesman of art, a man of grace, elegance, and unearthly beauty who moves through the streets like a silk-clad ghost of wisdom. The other is Michelangelo Buonarroti, 20 years his junior, a brooding volcanic genius who smells of stone dust and sweat, a man who views the world as a block of marble waiting to be conquered. This was not just a competition of skill, it was a clash of civilizations, a duel between the scientific calm of the intellect and the raw, tortured fire of the soul. Their rivalry would push the boundaries of human achievement to the breaking point, leaving behind a legacy of masterpieces born from the purest form of hatred. Leonardo da Vinci was nearly 50 years old when he returned to Florence, a living legend whose reputation preceded him like a divine herald. He was the quintessential Renaissance man, a scientist, an engineer, a musician, and a painter who saw the world through the lens of divine geometry. Leonardo was meticulous, often to a fault. He would spend days watching the flight of a bird or the ripple of water just to capture a single movement on paper. To him, art was a secondary product of understanding the universe. He was refined, dressed in short, rose-colored tunics that defied the fashion of the day and possessed a magnetic charm that drew people to him. However, he was also a man of many unfinished dreams. His notebooks were filled with flying machines and anatomical wonders, but his list of completed commissions was suspiciously short. He was a thinker who often struggled to be a doer, haunted by his own pursuit of perfection. Then there was Michelangelo. At 29, he had already carved the Pietà and the David, works so profoundly powerful they seem to have been breathed into existence by God himself. Michelangelo was the antithesis of Leonardo. He was solitary, prone to fits of rage, and lived in a state of perpetual filth, often sleeping in his boots to save time. He didn't care for the gentlemanly pursuits of Leonardo. To Michelangelo, Leonardo was a dandy, a man who wasted his genius on trivialities and failed to finish what he started. Michelangelo saw the act of creation as a physical struggle, a battle against the material world. He didn't just paint or sculpt, he suffered. While Leonardo was the favorite of the courts, Michelangelo was the Il Divino, the divine one who walked with the heavy burden of a prophet. The spark that turned their mutual distaste into an all-out war occurred on a street corner near the Church of Santa Trinita. A group of citizens were debating a difficult passage in Dante's Divine Comedy and asked Leonardo for his interpretation. At that moment, Michelangelo happened to walk by. In a rare gesture of politeness, Leonardo deferred to the younger artist, saying Michelangelo would surely know the answer. Michelangelo, sensing a sarcastic jab at his perceived lack of scholarly refinement, exploded. He shouted back at Leonardo, reminding him of his greatest public failure, the colossal bronze horse in Milan. "You made a design for a horse to be cast in bronze," Michelangelo sneered, his voice ringing through the square, "and you could not cast it, and you gave it up in shame." Leonardo, usually the master of composure, turned pale and silent as Michelangelo walked away. The insult was public, it was cruel, and it changed the course of art history forever. Seeing an opportunity to capitalize on this explosive tension, the Florentine Republic devised the ultimate artistic cage match. They commissioned both men to paint massive battle murals on opposite walls of the Great Council Hall in the Palazzo Vecchio. Leonardo was assigned the Battle of Anghiari, a celebration of a Florentine victory, while Michelangelo was given the Battle of Cassina. For the first time, the two titans would be working in the same room, on the same scale, under the watchful eyes of their fellow citizens. The city split into factions. It was the Team Leonardo of the old guard versus the Team Michelangelo of the rising generation. The pressure was suffocating. Every stroke of the brush was a political statement. Every sketch was a weapon. Leonardo approached his mural with the cold precision of a scientist. He wanted to capture beastly madness, the raw, chaotic energy of war. He studied the anatomy of horses until he understood every muscle and tendon. He experimented with a new technique, a mixture of oil and wax that he hoped would give the mural a depth and luminosity. His sketches were a whirlwind of interlocking bodies and screaming faces, a masterpiece of movement and psychology. On the other side of the room, Michelangelo prepared his counterattack. He chose a moment in the Battle of Cassina where the Florentine soldiers were surprised while bathing in a river. This allowed him to do what he did best, depict the male nude in every conceivable position of tension and movement. His figures were muscular, twisted, and hyper-realistic, showcasing a mastery of anatomy. As the work progressed, the atmosphere in the Hall of the 500 became toxic. Michelangelo would glare at Leonardo's scaffolding, openly mocking his slow pace and his obsession with feminine oil painting. Leonardo, in turn, wrote in his journals about the clumsy and over-muscled figures of his rival, comparing them to bags of nuts rather than human bodies. The rivalry pushed them both to the absolute limit of their capabilities. Leonardo achieved a level of dynamism in his horses that had never been seen in Western art. While Michelangelo's cartoon, the full-scale preparatory drawing, became the school of the world, studied by every young artist in Italy, including a young Raphael. But the duel of geniuses would end not with a clear winner, but with a double tragedy born of their own obsessions. Leonardo's experimental technique proved to be a disaster. To dry the thick layers of oil and wax, he lit giant charcoal braziers near the wall. The heat was uneven, the paint at the bottom of the mural began to run, and the colors at the top turned dark and muddy. Leonardo watched in horror as his masterpiece literally melted off the wall. Devastated and embarrassed by another high-profile failure, he abandoned the project and eventually left Florence for Milan, taking his sketches of the Mona Lisa with him. Michelangelo didn't fare much better. Just as he was beginning to transfer his legendary cartoon to the wall, he was summoned to Rome by the warrior Pope, Julius II. The Pope didn't want a mural, he wanted a tomb, a project so massive it would occupy Michelangelo for the next 40 years. Michelangelo begged to stay and finish his work in Florence, but the Pope's word was law. He left his mural unfinished, and the magnificent cartoon he had spent months perfecting was eventually torn to pieces. Today, neither original mural survives. We only know of their existence through copies made by other artists and the haunting sketches left behind in their notebooks. However, the war between Leonardo and Michelangelo did not end in the Palazzo Vecchio. It followed them to Rome, where Leonardo watched with quiet disdain as Michelangelo spent 4 agonizing years painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Leonardo had once said that painting was a noble intellectual pursuit, unlike the manual labor of sculpture. Now he saw his rival being forced to paint. Yet, when the Sistine ceiling was finally unveiled, even Leonardo could not deny its power. Michelangelo had taken the lessons he learned during their duel in Florence. He had won the battle of endurance, but Leonardo had already won the battle of influence, his sfumato technique and psychological depth becoming the gold standard for the High Renaissance. In their later years, the two men remained polar opposites. Leonardo spent his final days in France as the guest of King Francis I, a philosopher king who died in the arms of royalty. Michelangelo lived to be 88, outliving almost everyone of his generation. He became increasingly religious and reclusive, his art turning from the heroic nudes of his youth to the tortured, unfinished pietas of his old age. He never stopped grumbling about Leonardo, even long after the elder master was in his grave. The ghost of Leonardo da Vinci haunted Michelangelo's dreams, a reminder of a man who was everything he was not, effortless, beautiful, and calm. The duel between Leonardo and Michelangelo was a pivotal moment in human history. It was the friction between these two jagged stones that produced the sparks that lit the world. Without Leonardo's challenge, would Michelangelo have reached the terrifying heights of the Sistine Chapel? Without Michelangelo's youthful aggression, would Leonardo have pushed his studies of movement to such revolutionary lengths? We often think of great art as being born from inspiration and beauty, but the story of the Renaissance tells us something different. It tells us that greatness is often forged in the fires of jealousy, spite, and a desperate need to be better than the person standing on the other side of the room. They hated each other with every fiber of their being, and in doing so, they gave humanity a vision of what we are capable of when we refuse to settle for anything less than the divine. The Hall of the 500 remains empty of their murals today, but the echoes of their shouting, the scratching of their pens, and the sheer force of their clashing wills still resonate through every gallery and museum in the world. They were the sun and the moon of the Renaissance, forever apart, forever in opposition, and forever essential to the light we see by.